It's session 3 of the effective pricing course, and we're going to now start to get into building your actual pricing models. So managing the models, building your questions, building your price calculations behind them. As many of you know, I say this all the time, effective pricing is very near and dear to my heart. It had a huge impact on my business. Like we were just chatting about, I'm located in Southern Ontario, so some of my references by default may be Canadian. Apologies to everyone else all over the world. I am a certified professional bookkeeper, so I tend to focus more on the bookkeeping side of the models that I use rather than perhaps tax filing side, which some of you may use, but we are going to cover some of that in some later sessions. I do have a firm with a small team. However, at this point, I'm the only one doing the sales process and the only one using effective pricing, because it's part of the job that I enjoy doing. And that's the thing about being the boss, is you get to delegate some of the parts that you may not like so much. My firm has won a few awards. I won't really get into the details of them. I've mentioned them before. And I'm a member of Mark's Value Pricing Academy. I do know we have some people that come to these effective pricing sessions that aren't in the academy, because this course is open to everybody. But honestly, being a member of Mark's Academy in hand with effective pricing is really what had the huge impact on my business. The software does a lot for us, but there's so much that happens when we're building the price with the clients that's foundational before we even open the software with them. And so learning what I learned from Mark and some of the other instructors that he has throughout the years is what has given me such great results since I started using the program and using effective pricing. Just a reminder as well at this point that some of us may have different levels of access to the software. So remember, as we're going through it, if I'm demonstrating something that you don't see in your version, reach out to Sarah. I'm on the full plan, so I have access to everything. But if you're seeing something on the plan that you have that you don't have access to that I'm demonstrating, reach out to Sarah and she'll be able to assist you to get the plan that you need. Okay, so let's start with that first section about managing your pricing models. As with most things we're going to do, we're going to start with this little gear icon up in the top. And that's going to really open your menu of your access to pretty much everything in the program. So to manage our models, we're going to go right into model management. Once you're in here, you will see that there are several models in here that you have access to already. And this is one of the things that will differ according to the plan that you have. So as the full plan, you can see I have access to all of the models that Mark has created. If you're on a different plan, you may not see the same number of models. So that's one of the differences right away. These models are basically templates that Mark has created for us. And you know that it's a template when it has this orange button that says use model. These ones that say use for quote, and they're renamed a little bit differently, and they've got some other buttons here, share, delete, edit, clone. These are ones that I've actually either already made live or are in draft mode because I'm still changing some things on it. So these are things that we will be going through together. You'll also see at the top of the list, you have this drop down. This is where you can assign tags to the different types of models. The list that Mark provides us is quite long, and as you can see, some are related to business advisory, business startup, forecasting. whereas some is more related to bookkeeping, payroll, etc. So in this column, you will see the tags that are assigned to that model. So let's say this one is assigned to tax. If I go into this drop down and choose tax, that makes my list a lot shorter because I will only see the models that have the tax tag on it. And you can add your own tags or change the tags however you want. As you start using this and start creating your own models as well, your list is going to get even longer because you may start to have a different model for different types of services. You might have different models for different types of niches that you service. Perhaps you have a model for an e-commerce niche, and then you have a different model for a construction niche. So although the list is very long to start with the templates that Mark gives us, it's going to get even longer as you start creating your own models. So I really do recommend using those tags. You'll also see there's a create new button here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. I've never honestly felt a need to use it. For my business, every one of the models that Mark has given as a template is more than usable for me. Yes, I may have to make quite a few edits or changes to it, but it definitely gives me a great starting point rather than having to start from scratch. But if you have a very particular type of service that you need to create a model for, you do have the option of starting completely from scratch yourself. If anybody in the chat is an effective pricing user already, and I know from who's here, some of you are, could you drop into the chat if you've ever used the actual create new function yourself? What was the model that you were building that one of the templates didn't work for you, that you needed to use the create new? And I'll actually pass that information back on to Mark if there's several things that people are creating new for a similar type of situation, then maybe it means we need to create a model for that. Okay. Anyways, moving back on to the templates, I do see there's a few messages coming in that most people are doing what I'm doing, just use the templates and tweak them. I've never needed the create new button, but it's nice to have as an option in case I want to go in and play with it. Okay, so moving back to the models then, if you see one that's a title that's similar to what you're looking for, so like I said, I'm typically going to use bookkeeping for training purposes because I'm a bookkeeper. You would then click on the use model button, and it's going to open on this other screen. It will automatically change the name to the date and time tagged at the end here of when you have started using this model. Although that's a key sign that it's a model that you've created, I usually like to rename it myself. I'll put my company initials, and then although we have options of saving it in draft view versus live view, I usually say to be E, which means to be edited or something. Again, different strokes for different folks. It just depends on how you like to do it. I like to see it right in the model name. You have the option of choosing whether it's recurring work or one-time work. Because this is a bookkeeping model, I'm going to say yes, that it is recurring work. You can assign an icon to it. So these are the icons that will appear on this left-hand menu once you have made the model live that you want to use it from a client. And this becomes a shortcut place where you can open that model right away in a meeting with a client. And there are lots of different icons in here. You can see if I just start scrolling through the list, I'd say there's probably at least a couple hundred in here. There is a search icon at the top. Let's just search for rocket. There's a rocket. theme. If I search for dog, because one of my niches is the pet industry, then I have a couple of dog options. I'm not sure what, oh, that's a hot dog. I was going to say, I'm not sure what kind of dog that is. I'm going to choose the dog today because I feel like being cute. This is one of the places that you can choose whether you want it to go live or not. There are a couple of other places you can do that as well. Pardon me? Okay, if that was a question for me, I didn't get it, but I'm going to keep going. So there are a couple other places that you can choose very quickly whether you want the model to be live or not. For today's purposes, I'm just going to leave it as no, that it's not live, because we're going to be playing around and working with it. The fixed price template and the payment plan print template, that's a bit of a mouthful for me this morning. We're going to be looking at that at another time. And then again, here is where you can add a tag. So because this is a bookkeeping model, Mark by default has it tagged for us already as bookkeeping. Lots of times, guys, you're going to hear me say all the time in the software, make sure that you're hitting save and continue. Okay, so that would be where you see the model management when you start to get into the model. We're going to get back into here with the question section. For now, I just want to go back into the main model management screen and show you a couple of the other options. So this is the one I just created. This is one of the other places that you can choose whether you want it to be live or in draft. You just click on that button and it will toggle back and forth. I want to show you a couple other options in here. If you delete a model, let me just delete one of these previous ones. It is deleted permanently. There's no way to get it back. I'm going to delete this one too, and we'll just work with one at a time. You also, of course, have your edit button. So if it's in draft mode and you're in the process of editing it still and you didn't finish and you want to go back into it, you would just click your edit button. You also have this clone button. Let's say you have a model that is two models that you want to use that are very similar to each other, but one just maybe has some different price calculations or a couple of different questions or some different wording, or maybe a different print template that you want to use attached at the end of it. For most purposes, a lot of things in the model are the same and you've already edited it almost exactly the way you want to be. You can clone that model and then just go in and make the couple of minimum changes that you want, rather than starting all over again with one of Mark's models and having to change everything. One thing that I wanted to mention about when it's live, that does not mean that your client will automatically see it. They still only see what you want them to see. This part here is not a client-facing screen of what your client would see when you were actually doing that. There's also a share model here. You'll get a consent box that pops up. And this basically means that effective pricing, Mark's team, will then view that model, revise it if necessary, and share it with other effective pricing customers. So as you can see down at the bottom, one of the models is from Jessica Fox, who's another one of Mark's trainers. I'm sure most of you know Jessica. She has her monthly bookkeeping model here that she has shared with Mark's team, and Mark's team then turns around and shares it with everybody as one of the model templates. We don't have the ability to actually share with one person. So if you and another person work closely together, you're maybe business partners or colleagues that are doing some co-working sessions together to try and get your effective pricing up and running together, we don't have the ability to share directly back and forth like that. Okay, so that is the main menu of managing your models. So now let's go in and look at how to edit a model. I see a question came in. Let me just check that. Which training will we go over how to get the questions, prices for the different packages? For example, I want to add budgets to the top and middle package, but not the entry level package. And how will I see it working in the price review? Linda, I think we're gonna, that's a bit of a loaded question. I think it's actually covered over more than just one session. We are going to be looking at some stuff today about packages, but one thing, and I don't know if this is where you're going, but it's good to mention that one thing about the effective pricing software, it is not dynamic for your packages to change. So what I mean by that is, let's say you ask a customer a question of how often they want to have meetings, weekly, monthly, or quarterly, and you have in your packages that quarterly is in your base package, monthly is in your middle package, and weekly is in your premium package. If they choose weekly meetings, that does not automatically mean that they will be getting your premium package. When we get to the package review page, your packages are predetermined and pre-set up. It's just how we set up the prices behind that. So the questions don't actually drive the packages themselves. It drives the price, but there's still going to be a bit of a blend or a mix of customers maybe wanting a little bit of one package or a little bit of another. So you need to be clear before you put your packages in here of what you want your packages to be. So if you have budgets in your top and middle package, then you would create your packages, and then have it in the software, and your package page would show at the end when you're revealing the price. When we get a little bit further on into this session and next month's session as well, I think that might become a little bit more clear, but hopefully that answers pretty good for now. Okay. So, whoops, lost my software. All right, so now we've gone back into edit. I've already shown you this screen. I'm just going to hit save and continue. Okay. So the first thing you'll get when you edit the pricing questions, like after you've hit save and continue, is this menus section. I'm just going to forward my notes here a bit, setting up your questions. Okay, so on the left side, you have this menu or workflow. It allows us to go through editing your model in any order you want. You can jump around. You don't have to go in order. And you can easily jump forwards and backwards to any section as needed. In the beginning, when you're just getting started, I do highly recommend going through it in order, just for a logical sense to get used to it. And when you are going through it in order, again, make sure that you're using this save and continue button all the time. It's available at both the top and the bottom of every page. So regardless of where you're working, it will automatically take you to the next section. You'll see we also have a back button wherever you are in the process. So if I was on the expressing price page and I hit back, it's going to take me back to questions. If I'm on rewards and I hit back, it's going to take me to packages. So it's not going to take you back to necessarily the screen that you were previously on. It's going to take you back to whatever the previous screen is in the order of the workflow on the left side here. All right, so the questions is what will have the biggest impact on the end price that the customer sees. If you remember from our previous session, for those of you that saw it, for the most part, the order in which they answer the questions impacts the way the price builds up. I mentioned those 11 steps of how the software calculates the price. And so asking the questions in a specific order with the correct calculation types will impact how your price builds. So if your first question is your bookkeeping up to date? And there's a price built into that where if they say no, you're going to charge $500 right off the top. That is what your price would start building at. But then let's say you have a question further down that's a multiplication question. Sorry, I'm twisting over my tongue a lot today. I'm going on vacation tomorrow, so I'm kind of half in that mode already. So if you have a multiplication question later that multiplies by 0, for example, it could reset your price back to 0, and then your price will start calculating over again from that question forward. And we're going to look at this when we start looking at troubleshooting, when you start running into problems and what this would look like. I am going to intentionally force some mistakes to happen, and we'll break it, and then we'll look at the troubleshooting of how to fix it. So remember, this is our view of the software. So we're seeing all of our questions on one long page here. We don't necessarily want it to appear to a customer like that. It could be overwhelming. So instead, what we have are sections. So in this workflow, or in this template example, we have an about your business section. We have a bill pay services section, and other things you may want section, so on and so forth. When you're doing this in front of a client, they will only see one section at a time. So in this first one, they're going to see approximately 10 questions, and then you would hit save and continue. And then they would see the next page that only has 2 questions. You answer those, hit save and continue, and it goes to the next section. So for our purposes, the questions are all going to be on one page. So let's say you wanted to add another section. So for example, in my model, I have a section called HR and payroll, and I will put that there, and you'll see it now appears at the bottom. Again, I can click and drag this around in what order I want it to be in, and then I can start adding questions to it. So when setting up your questions and you're dividing them into sections, you can use these toggle buttons. You can move questions around from one section to another. If I wanted to move foreign currency down to bill pays, I can. So there's lots of flexibility to put things in whatever order you want. Just remember, the order that the questions are in is going to impact how your price builds. So when you move a question that might have a different type of pricing calculation, if you move it to a different spot, be aware of the impact that that is going to have on your price. So I'm going to use this section that I just built here for HR and payroll. We're going to add a couple of questions, but let me first show you up here. We also have the delete option. So if you're using one of Mark's templates and there's an entire section that doesn't relate to what you do, perhaps you don't do bill pay services, you can delete that. Again, anything that you delete is permanent, and you can see now that that bill pay section is gone. I like to use the sections, especially if it's a very lengthy model with a list of questions, which it can be for some of my niche clients. So some of my niche clients will have very specific questions, and I'll break that down into different sections for them. If I have an HR and payroll section, for example, and my client doesn't have payroll, I can quickly skip over that entire section. You'll see in another couple of options here of hide and isolate. I'm not going to talk about those today. Those are advanced features of the software that we'll look at in future sessions. I already covered about how you can click and drag sections around and deleting an entire section, and we're going to look at how to add and edit questions. So if I go down to my HR and payroll section and I click on add a question, I can say, do you have employees? The description would be like a little tooltip if you wanted to. Perhaps you're not the one doing the pricing software, or maybe you want to just remind yourself to explain the question. It'll like, do you have employees? Pretty standard, but you might have a question that's a little more complex that you want to have a little description that appears like a tooltip that you can remember to explain that to the client. Then we looked at this last time, you have 4 different question types. Oops, my mouse was scrolling. You can choose whether you want it to be a drop-down question, a yes or no answer, a value. So it could be a question where you're asking, how many employees do you have? And then you want a value answer, or it can be a free text field. And where that one becomes handy is you might want to ask a question along the lines of, how did you hear about us? And that can be a free text field. You could have it as a drop down as well with different options, but you could have it as a free text field that for your own purposes later, you can use that when the software links to our proposals later, which we're going to cover in future sessions as well. It will pull from that free text field automatically into your proposal. So I'm just going to say for now that it's a drop down. Then we have calculation types. So it can be a percentage increase. It can multiply by a number, add a number. Then there's the number of units and unit price. Those are the two that go together, which we're going to look at individually later today. There's raised to the power and root. I've never used. Again, if anybody in the chat today has used them, I'd love to know when and what the situation was. And then there's minus. I like to go with the principle, guys, of keep it simple. The more complex you make it, the more risk there is for errors and troubleshooting. So I typically use percentage increase, multiply, add. I do occasionally use the number of units and unit price. And once in a while, I will use the minus section, not too often. So for this question I'm adding, I'm just going to select that we're going to add an amount. So remember, I will have had a price already from all of these other questions that have already been added or already been answered, sorry, because the price is calculating as the questions go in order. And so now when I get to this question that I'm adding at the bottom, it's going to add whatever amount they answer onto the running price that has been calculated. There is, again, in the templates, Mark gives us templates of different standard drop-down type answers. So it could be the number. So there's a question in there about the number of sales invoices. I'll use that one in a minute when I'm showing you how to edit a question. It could be the industry sector that they're in. Let's actually use that one, and I will change my question. What industry are you in? So you can see now here when it's saying please select, we have the option to create our own drop down if you want. So you would give it a name, and let's just say I'm going to use industry type subjects. And then I'm going to use some school subjects because we're just playing around. So I'm going to say English. If they want English services, it's $1,000. If they want math services, it's $1,500. If they want history, which was one of my worst subjects, I'm going to charge them $5,000 for that one. And I can save that. And then there is my drop down list that when I ask them that question and I show them the drop down, these are the list of answers that they would have to choose from. They're not going to see the price that's associated with it. They're only going to see English, math, or history. I also have the option of choosing what I want the default value to be. This becomes important if I'm wanting to skip a section, like I said, like I've kind of been playing around with it, but I was making this section about payroll. If they did not have payroll and I wanted to quickly skip this section, I would need to have a default value that was 0, so that when I quickly skip the section, it doesn't calculate any price. So if I had that as default English and I skipped the section, it would still assume a default of English and it would still add $1,000. So I'm going to leave the default value as please select, and then when I'm skipping the section, it won't add any price to it. So that's how we could add a question. I said I was going to go back to the number of sales invoices one and show you how to edit. Really similar, guys. We're just going to click on edit instead of add. This is the template that Mark gives us. He again has it set up as a drop-down type of question, calculation type add. You can also modify these values that Mark gives us in the template. So you just click on modify, and then you can go in and change the prices. Again, you can change the order. Maybe I want this to be 1 to 50 invoices, and then this one is going to be 51 to 100. So again, all kinds of things that you can change and modify on your own. And a reminder again, these are annual prices that we're calculating in here. Okay, so they may be getting 1 to 50 sales invoices a month, but if they're getting 1 to 50 sales invoices a month, that means I'm adding $600 a year onto their price. Okay, so that is how to add questions, add sections, move things around, delete them, edit questions. I'm going to take a quick check for questions here. For the purposes of this page, you want to be pretty comfortable with the order that your questions are in before you start going in and editing any of the pricing amounts, because again, it calculates in the order. So when you're looking at your questions and you're adding your questions, make sure that you have them in the order that you want them in first before you start editing or calculating any price calculations. Another reminder as well before I move on about the save and continue button. Even though we have the ability to jump around from screens here, if you've made changes on a section, if you do not hit this save and continue button and you just jump to another section, I'll just do that, your changes won't be saved. So if I go back to questions now, oh, I must have hit save at some point. Sorry. If you hadn't hit save and continue, these changes that I had made would not be here. So I can't stress enough how important that save and continue button is. Okay. So Claude has a question. Can you please briefly demonstrate the customer facing look and feel? I definitely will do that, Cloud, but it's not going to be part of today's session. If we have time at the end, I don't mind jumping into that quickly, but the main purpose for today is to show you how to build the models. And then that's actually in a future session where I go through a little demonstration with you of how it is when it's customer facing. But being as you've asked that, I will try and save a few minutes at the end if we're not running over on time to do that. Okay, so that is setting up your questions. I'm just going to show you the slide here a little bit. I showed you the 4 different types of questions, the 8 different calculation types. Yes or no, pretty self-explanatory. If they answer yes to a question, there's going to be a price attached to it. If they answer no to the question, there won't be. The drop down allows them to choose from a list of questions, and that's where I showed you. You can set up from scratch or modify a template that's there. The value is where we want the answer to be a number. For example, how many bank accounts do you have? And they would answer 2 or 3 or whatever. And the free text, like I said, is where you can just manually type in whatever answer they've told you. And I gave the example, like, how did you hear about us? The calculation types, this is now where you're telling the software what type of calculation to do when you ask that question based on the answer that they provide. So the first two, percentage increase and multiple, essentially really do the same thing. It's just a matter of personal preference of how you like to do your math. I like to use the percentage increase option. I'll tell you why. Using an example, sales tax example, if you have a yes or no question, you would see we have 2 boxes at the bottom, a yes value and a no value. Let me just quickly show you what that looks like. I'm just going to randomly pick. Oh, I picked one that says yes or no. So you're going to see at the bottom here, we have 2 boxes now because it's not a drop down list. So we have a yes value box and a no value box. And we're going to assign a price that if they answer yes, we're putting a price in. If they answer no, we're putting a price in. If I were to choose this to be a multiply question, and they answered no, I touched on this briefly, but I want to demo it now. If they answer no to this question, and this question falls somewhere in the middle of the order of your questions, every price that has been calculated up until that point, let's say you've asked them 6 questions and their price is $4,000 a year so far. If they answer this question and they say no, and you have it set up as a multiply, it's going to multiply that running total of $4,000 by 0, and it's going to reset your calculations from 0 from this question forward. It will start calculating from 0 again. So that's why I typically use a percentage increase rather than a multiply. If I were using percentage increase, I still get the yes or no value, but now it's if they answer no and they say 0, there is not going to be any multiplication that's going to reset their running total to 0. It just means that there's not going to be any type of percentage increase. If they answer yes, then I could say what percentage I want if they say yes to this question, do you want us to collect and deliver your paperwork? If they say yes to that question, I'm going to add 5% on to the price, or 15%, I would say 1.15 or something. So that is really a key difference of choosing between percentage or multiply. Next we have, I'm just going to flip back to my options. Next we have add, pretty self-explanatory. If, again, using a sales tax example, if they say yes, I'm going to add on $1,000 a year to their annual price. If they say no, it's going to be 0. 90% of the time, sorry, I'm just going to take a sip of water. 90% of the time, my questions are typically percentage increase or add. Like I said, I do keep it simple. There's less room for problems with my calculations, less troubleshooting. I never use, and I don't think anybody posted in the chat either that they use the raised to power or root examples. And then occasionally I do use the number of units and the unit price and minus options, but 90% of my questions are percentage increase or add. All right, you'll also see at the bottom of the screen in that yes or no, I showed you the default value section. So let me just go back to, I think it was this question, yes or no. You have a default value section here. This is where If they don't answer the question, maybe it's in a section that you've skipped over, or there's a reason that you've skipped over, you can choose what you want the default to be. So unless I'm really certain of something, I typically have my defaults set to no, unless it's something that I'm really certain that I know that this particular model that they're going to say yes for sure. But again, we do have the option always of them choosing yes or no. It's just that the software does give you the option of having the default. And then finally, we have the minus section, does the opposite of add. So you might use that, for example, in your behavior rewards section or your discount section, where you want to minus off of the price that has been calculated. Or perhaps I've seen it sometimes in the industry question. If you have an industry that is perhaps easier to deal with than standard, you may want to minus a little bit off for that particular one. Okay, so that was a really long sort of explanation about the different types of questions and the calculation types, but they're important. So I want to show you, I'll check for questions in a moment, but I want to show you before we move on again. If I were to choose a value type where the answer will be a number, you'll see my options at the bottom of the screen change here to now. I no longer have a yes or no value. I have a value or a default value. It's really helpful if I want to change a set price based on a number of something that they have. For example, if we'll use the number of bank accounts question, if I ask them how many bank accounts do they have, and I change my value here to 100, for example, depending on their answer to the question, the software will automatically calculate this for you. So if they answer, if this is a value field, and I have this set to add, and they answer 3 to this question when you ask them, the software will automatically take that value of 100, multiply it by the number of the value that they've answered, which was 3, and it will then add $300 to the price. Okay. And then in the drop-down section, we have, like I said, the existing templates that Mark has given us here already. There is another spot in the software you can create templates as well, but I find it just as easy to do them on the fly here if you need to create one. Okay, I'm going to do a little water break. Sorry, I'm feeling pretty dry today, and I don't see any questions, so I'm going to keep going. We've got a few sections to cover still, and I'd like to have time to do that front-facing format. All right, so before I jump into this, again, you're going to get these slides. We're going to talk about conditional formatting, and then we're going to, right after that, we're going to talk about unit pricing. So these are just a couple of tips for you that you'll get. So one of the questions that people often have about this question and answer type of program, does it have conditional logic? And I kind of mentioned this earlier when I was answering Linda's question. So this talks about it a bit more. People want to know, am I able to ask a question? And depending on the answer that they give, determines the follow-up questions that I plan to ask. Like you would typically see in a lot of form builders where there's conditional logic jumps. You could ask a prospect, do you have staff? And if they answer yes, then it opens up several follow-up questions that I need to know about the staff. Effective pricing doesn't have conditional logic in that typical sense of how you may be used to it with form builders. due to the complexity of the pricing calculations that are going on in the background. When the software was being designed, it was considered, but it was determined that the usual type of conditional logic that's seen in form builders that we may be accustomed to wouldn't work very well in the program. And in order to make it work like that, it would create an extremely high developer price tag for the software, which would have made the program a lot more expensive for all of us. So at the time, Mark made the decision not to have the conditional logic applied, but instead he created a workaround. So this is the conditional formatting and the unit pricing. So how you would look at this is when you have one of those do you have or do you need type of questions, where if the answer is no, you can skip a bunch of the other questions. You would start by making sure that all of those questions are first in their own section. So I'm just going to, we'll use this section because it exists already, and I want to save some time from creating a new one. So we're going to say other things you might want. We're going to pretend that this is a conditional formatting section. So you would start by a section where your first question is that do you want type question. So I'm just going to say, do you want us to do your payroll? Okay. The question type will be yes or no. And your calculation type will be add, sorry. And you're going to put 0 for both yes and no default values. And the reason being is because if you ask this question and it doesn't apply to them and you want to skip the whole section, then you don't want it to apply to a price. Linda, I did see your question come up about this enable individual package pricing. I'm sorry I didn't mention it at the time, and also enable additions. These are some advanced features that will be covered later in future sessions. So we won't be looking at those today. Okay, so I have my first question as the do you have or do you need or do you want type of question. Once we have that, regardless of how they answer, it's going to have no impact on the price. So you want to have your, I also recommend having your default value as no. Sorry, I didn't change that. Then if you have follow-up questions where if they do say yes, your follow-up questions in this section is where the price would start to be billed. You just need to be sure that in all of your follow-up questions, one of the possible answers in there will allow there to be no addition to the price. So for example, we'll just go into question number 2. And we're going to pretend again, well, it is a yes or no type of question again. And I'm just going to change it back to add. You always want to make sure for these types of conditional formatting that you have an option that will be 0 if they say no, and that your default value is no, so that the only way that anything will change in that section is if they specifically answer yes. So if I have everything in, I won't go into every question. I'm just going to delete a couple quickly. If I had both of these questions set up as simple yes or no adds with a 0 value, and I ask them this first question, do you want us to do your payroll? And they say no. When I'm client facing, I can very quickly hit save and continue and move to the next section without asking them any of these other questions, because they will all have default values of 0 and it doesn't apply to them. So that's what happens when you've properly set up those defaults and the client says no to that first question and you skip them, no price is going to get added. So that is the conditional formatting workaround that would be similar to the typical type of conditional logic that we might be familiar with. The other advantage to having those types of questions in their own section is the isolate button. We talked about this briefly in our session last month, but that isolate section works very similar to brackets in a math question. So it will calculate whatever is inside the brackets, or in our case, inside that section. So if you look at this list, it's building a price, it's building a price, it's building a price. It's got a running total at the end of all of these questions. If I were to isolate this, it will now calculate a price for just that section on its own, and it gets added separately as it'll come up with a total for that isolated section, and that gets added separately to your running total again. So you could have some additions, you could have some minuses in there. It's not going to affect your overall running total. If you isolate it, it's only going to impact that section. Okay. So next I want to look at, I don't see any questions. Next, we're going to look at unit pricing. So again, a couple of tips. Remember, it's a two-part question. I'm going to show you this in the software in just a moment. You always need to ask your number of units question first with a default value of 0 on the answer. The number of units question is not what is going to directly impact the price. Later in the questions, and you'll see when we demo it in just a moment, it doesn't have to be right after one another. You could have your unit price question, which is the second half of that formula calculation, and that will take whatever number was entered in the unit number of questions and will then calculate a price for you. So let's take a look at how that looks. Okay, so we're back in the software. I'm just going to randomly pull up how many active bank accounts do you have? So let's edit this question. And we're going to make it a number of units question, okay? And so it's going to be a value. They're going to answer with a number of bank accounts that they have. And this will be a good one if we can do the live demo afterwards. This will be a good one that I will show you how it works. But at this point, it is not going to calculate any change to the price. So I've asked them, how many bank accounts do you have? I'm going to delete that one. Confusing me a little bit. How many bank accounts do you have? And we said it was a number of units, and it's a value question where they're going to answer, I have 2 bank accounts or 3 bank accounts. Then let's say down here in the other things you might want question, I'm going to say, just sporadically, do you want us to reconcile your bank accounts? So now how this would work is I would now choose the unit price. And here is the question. So there was another one that was set up in there already, but here is the previous question. So you can have more than one number of units question and different unit pricing questions later. So here's the one that I just changed to how many bank accounts do you have? So I would select that one. And then I would put in a value of what it's going to cost for us to reconcile their bank account. So I'm just going to open my window. I'm feeling a little hot. I would put in a value of, let's say they want me to reconcile their bank accounts. I'm going to say it's $200 a year per bank account, or whatever price you want to use. So remember, these have to be used in tandem. The number of units questioned by itself is not going to have any impact on the price. So let's go take a look at that. So I'm going to say drop down. Let's just quickly say number of bank accounts. And I'll say 100, two, and I'll hit save. And save again. So now we've got that set up. I want to quickly show you on the review screen of how that works. So this isn't exactly, it's still not customer facing, but it is where you will do your troubleshooting and stuff when you're setting up your question. So I'm just going to randomly select a couple of questions. So here's the number of bank accounts question that I had. I'm going to say they have 3. So that's my, that's my one password popping up thinking that I want to input my credit card number. So that is my number of units question. And then down here was where I put, do you want us to reconcile your bank accounts? And I'm going to say, yes, they want us to reconcile 2 of them. I know I'm just playing around with funny numbers here. But now if I hit calculate, you can see my price is building based on how they're answering all these previous questions. The do you operate a sales ledger question, the price is $1,350. How many active bank accounts do you have? 3. The price is still $1,350. The price hasn't changed because it's simply a number of units question. We're simply gathering information to use later in our software. So then the price keeps building. Now I get down here to, do you want us to reconcile your bank accounts? And they've said 2. This is where you can now see that the price has increased based on their answer to this question here. So it's a concept that you have to play around with a little bit. We will go over this more when we start getting into building some actual models and going through some testing and troubleshooting together. But it is something that you typically need to play around with. It's one that it's a very helpful question method, but it's also one that causes the most troubleshooting problems at the end. When I'm helping somebody that's having a problem and I look at their review page, this is typically one of this, and the multiply answer is typically the 2 biggest reasons that your price might go a little bit wonky. Okay, so we looked at that on the review page. Any questions about that? I'm going to move on to the different ways of expressing the price. I know we have about 15 minutes left, and I still want to cover a few more things with you. So I am going to move on, but I will come back and check if anybody had questions about unit pricing. Okay, so next we have expressing the price. Again, we're going to look at this in the software in a moment. So there's 5 different areas to customize how the price is expressed. And again, this would be what is client facing to your customer. So I think looking at the time, I think we will have time to quickly make this a live version and use it and just jump around a little bit. Even though the prices may not make sense at the end, at least we'll be able to look at how some things look when it is client facing. So these are areas that we can customize. So you can customize your sales tax text field, your primary pricing description, which is a free form text field, your secondary pricing description, again, another free form text field. So these are fields where you can type in whatever you want your wording to be. We're going to look at it each in just a moment in the software. your package pricing description, and then any cancellation text that you want to use. And then there's also a most popular option. So let's look at this in the software. I'm going to go over to my left-hand menu now, and I'm going to go to my expressing price section. We did spend a lot of time in here in the previous section where we looked at the global pricing. Today, we're going to be focusing on this standard text section. So we did talk about, how the base price is optional. I won't reveal it too much. A lot of people leave that at 0. This is the starting price. Before you ask your very first question, this is your starting price. So I refer to it as my get out of bed price. I am not starting a client's books before I even ask them a single question, unless their price is $500 a month or more. So that would be what I put in as my base price. And then if I had $500 in there, actually, let's just, since I'm going to show you in a minute, we'll just see what that looks like. All right, so let's look at the expressing the price options. You have the option to show or hide the tax field. So if you wanted to say show, you could say plus tax, or you could say including tax, or you could say plus VAT or plus HST, depending on what area you're in. So it's a free form text field. You can use whatever words you want, and that is what would be revealed with your price. And again, make sure your wording matches what you have set up in your settings, which we covered in a previous section. If you have it set up that the tax is included in the price, or that the model that you're using, maybe it's a sponsorship model or something that doesn't have tax applicable on it, make sure that whatever model you're using, that the text that you have in here matches the settings that you have that we covered in the previous session. The default here is going to be hide, but if you do change it to reveal, then you would get the box that shows where you can type stuff in. And when you reveal the price to your client in the live version, it will show whatever you have typed in. The primary pricing description, again, it's a free form text field. It appears just before the price, so you can say anything that you'd like in here. Mark uses as an example of your small monthly investment is just, and this is part of breaking down the price or chunking down the price for the price psychology of making the price seem smaller. The secondary pricing description, you could type in something like, this is tax deductible, or something, because our fees are tax deductible, right? The package pricing description is how you want to describe how your payments are revealed. So if you have a model that is monthly payments of or quarterly payments of, you could change, we're using a monthly model here, but you can change that text field to, again, be whatever you want it to be. Cancellation text, some people, the default is to leave it blank, but you might have a cancellation policy. You may say you have 30 days to request a refund, or whatever your company's policy is about cancellation, you can type that in. And then there is the most popular text that would appear on the pricing parameters page, which is another menu option here that we looked at in the previous section. If you choose to show the most popular message displayed with one of your packages, a lot of people display this on their middle package. I actually choose to display it on my premium package, and knock on wood, so far that's worked pretty well for me, because everybody that I've used effective pricing list since I started using it has chosen my premium package. So I'm pretty happy about that. But you could say most popular, you could put popular, can't spell, can't type either. You could change that again, freeform text field. You can change that to whatever you want it to be. But again, you have to turn it on in the pricing parameters page if you want that to display. Okay. Be aware with these freeform text fields, be aware of how long your free texts are. You may want to play around with it a little bit to see how it appears at the end. If you put in anything much longer than the default that Mark has here, it doesn't really appear very nicely at the end. So you really want to keep it short and sweet. So let's go ahead and take a look at a quote. I'm just going to hit save and continue. And I'm going to jump to the review page. Here is when I mentioned that there was a couple of ways to make a version live or in draft mode. Here is one of the other ways. There's this little toggle button right here as well, where if I toggle that, it's in live mode. If I toggle it off, it's in draft mode. And remember, I showed you in my model management, this is one of the other places we can toggle it. And also when I'm in here, I can toggle it right here. So we have 3 places that we can toggle that. So I'm just actually going to make it live. And we are going to have time to go look at how this appears. Sorry, water break, at how this appears in front of a client. I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. So when I'm doing this for a client, this screen here, I would actually have set up before I start the meeting with my client. So I'm just going to say Jack Black. You don't have to fill in everything. There are some fields that are mandatory, but for today's purposes, I'm just going to put the name in. I'm going to say that he's a prospect. He might be an existing client that you are requoting or upselling. So you do have that option. And then the date of the quote, which you can manually override. So if I'm setting this up maybe the day ahead of time before I'm meeting with him, I can change this to tomorrow's date, which is the date that I would actually be providing the quote. I'm going to hit save and continue. This is the screen that I start my client meeting on, not the previous screen. Like I said, the previous screen I do before I start my meeting with them. So we are just going to we've seen all the questions. I'm going to show you when we were looking in our view, all of these sections were broken down into one long list. You can see here now that it is broken down into sections rather than one long list. This is my units question. So I'm going to answer that one. There's my credit card information again. So glad most of it is blocked out. I'll have to make sure that doesn't pop up next time. I'm not going to spend a lot of time answering some questions. I'm just going to make sure some of them say yes and no. And then here's the other option about my unit pricing question. I said they had 2 bank accounts. They're going to say yes, they want us to reconcile both bank accounts. You can see this is the other section that I went in. I said, what industry are you in? And then I put in some school subjects. I'm going to say history because that was my worst subject in school. And it's the one that I'm going to charge the most for. So we should see a nice big price pop up at the end here. Again, as I'm going through here, I'm using that save and continue button. So here we are now at our fixed price page. So somebody had asked earlier about their packages, and I had said about how the questions in the software don't drive what your packages are. Your packages are set and they need to be determined ahead of time. So I would spend some time reviewing this with the client, which I would have done with my brochure as well. And before I reveal any price, I would ask them, which package do you think is a good fit for you? I would have reviewed all of these different things. And let's say they say, oh, I think your premium package is the one that looks good for me. By clicking that once, it will highlight that column. And now when I click on fixed price, you're going to see a few things happen. So now you're going to see this small monthly investment message that we put in on the settings. You're going to see the 12 payments of, which we put in, because in my pricing parameters page, I had said that it was a model with 12. And then in the free form text field, I had said payments of. So those two sections are working together to do that. And then we have some fields here where you can put X's. You can type in free form text that says free. I don't have an example in here, but you can also put like a dash mark or an NA if it's not applicable. So this is what the customer would actually see. You have little tooltip options that you can modify the text for. So what I typically say for my premium one is it's comparable to having a full-time bookkeeper available for them. My middle package is comparable to having a part-time bookkeeper, and my entry-level package is mostly do-it-yourself with a bookkeeper double checking your work. My tooltips are along those lines. So you can hover over those. You've revealed the price to your client. The client says, yep, select is good, premium is good. So I'm going to select that one again. And now it moves me to my upsells page. I just want to show you if they were toggling back and forth or hesitant about the price. I'm going to go about 2 minutes over on time, guys, because I want to show you a couple things here still. If they were hesitating on price, the first thing that you would do is go back to the questions, their preference questions. They're about, see if there's anything that maybe was a nice to have, but not a need to have that they want to change. And then come back and recalculate their price for them. You don't want to offer rewards or discounts unless you've exhausted other options first. So if you wanted to offer rewards or discounts, that is this BR button. Again, these are all customizable. They're leaning towards my premium package. Sorry, there's my timer going off. If they say yes, you can see it changes their price right on the spot, and you will have set up the calculations in the background already before this. I'm hitting save. Now it's still going to take me to the next step, which is the enhancements page, where you can say, you know what, do you want cash flow and cash management report? They're going to say yes. That is going to change their price again right in front of them. So the whole time they can see their price as they are building it through here. Not when you're asking the questions. They don't see those prices that you have built into the background, but in the behavior rewards and the enhancements, they will see the impact on the price right away because you've already revealed the main price. So now it's different. And then we have our payment plan page. Again, just going to go through these last couple of steps pretty quickly because we're going to cover them in more detail in future sessions. But this would be another place where you could choose whether sales tax was applicable or not. You have your net payment, your tax amount, your gross, when the date is payable. There's your cancellation policy text, which was a free form field that we could type in if you want, and then save and continue. You get this summary page. There's a couple of different print options available here, which again will be covered in future sessions. If your customer wanted a one-pager print of this to think about it, you could easily do that. We will set up a template for that later in the training, and then you could print a template for them. And then you would save and complete the quote. So that is it for today's session.